Hello and welcome to the David Watson podcast. In this episode, I am talking to Giles. Giles is a returning guest and it's just a man that I find fascinating. He has done so many things. And today we were talking about a couple of charities that he's been involved in. And I'm not going to give too much away. The links will be in the description. As always, these people need as much support as they can be given. But really, it'd just be nice if people can try and understand where Giles and I were coming from. And that's the differences between our country, our culture, compared to other countries and other cultures. And for me, on a personal note, I probably do bang the drum a little bit about how good I think this country really is, and that we have a lot going for us. And we could be in a much worse position. So yeah, I'm probably coming from the point of a very proud Brit. But I do hope you enjoy the episode. And if you do, please like, subscribe, and share. It's always appreciated. Good morning. Welcome to the David Watson podcast. Again, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, David. Very nice to be here, and looking forward to having a chat with you.
Yeah, definitely. Because like you said, when we spoke the first time, I remember one of the things I talked about was this big, long list of things that you had done and were involved in over the years. And I really just had no idea where to start. But one of the things that we kind of got into but didn't get into details on was some of the work that you've been doing in Africa.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, which seems a long time ago now because of the old pandemic, and I haven't been there for a couple of years or so. And I keep getting these longings to touch the earth of Africa once again. And every time I look at the governments of putting Kenya on the red list and all this sort of stuff, I'm thinking, oh no, it's not going to happen again. But I'm really hoping to go back to Kenya this June, late next June, and see some friends out there. That's what I'm hoping. We'll see. We'll have to see, I guess.
So how did you get involved in going over there in the first place?
So I'm very lucky in my job in that, I've actually, I was talking to someone the other day who's quite a young teacher, and she kind of quizzed me. It was almost a bit like a podcast, like talking to you, Dave. We had after I'd done duty, I do a duty night once a week in one of the boarding houses. It's one of the girls' houses actually, and I love it actually. Go and have a bit of chat, a bit of fun, and talk to some interesting kids, and then we tend to wind down with a glass of wine at the end of the evening, just have a chat. And if you like, a new friend, Chloe, was there. She's now the deputy house mistress, and she plied me with a couple of glasses of wine, and basically just ended up chatting about what I've been up to. And she said, gosh, you must have had to adapt to being at the same place for so long and do so many different things. And I think I have. And so after I've finished being a housemaster, I ended up working in admissions. And I don't know if I said this last time to you, but I think that my boss, I'm not sure he fancied the Africa trip. I think some stories of things going wrong in Africa, but also maybe, to be fair to him, it was probably the wrong time of term. So at the end of term, there's an opportunity to go out to a school and wave your flag and say to people, why don't you come to our school? Why don't you come to Shrewsbury School and spend 5 years with us and be educated in the appropriate manner? And so it's basically a sales job. So you go out there and you just say, look, this is a nice school, why don't you come to us? And you go to the private schools out there, the private prep schools, and you hope that you might bump into some wealthy and interested people who might want to send their kids overseas, and some people do. So that's really how I got to go over there. But the thing is, the prep school I go to is called Pembroke, which is in the middle of Kenya. It's in Gilgil. It's about 2 hours north of Nairobi, and right by it is, you've got this rather smart prep school in the Gilgil Club, and I think I might be right in saying, isn't it something to do with the old white mischief and all those sort of the colonial colonial mischief that happened up there? But also, so around the corner you've got this quite deprived area, if you like, and a small village, Langa Langa, and one other two little places. And you've got this place called Restart Africa, which is basically, it was an orphanage. It was for kids who had no family at all. And now it's changed slightly, and some kids will go there for a period of sort of, I suppose to get away from families that for some reason can't look after them or aren't looking after them very well. So there's a little bit of, it's now becoming integrated with the Kenyan social services, which is improving gradually and steadily, I guess. So it's still doing a very good job looking after kids who I think otherwise would have very little chance in life. And I got to go there because I know the lady who runs it, and her grandchildren come to Shrewsbury School, and they're lovely. And she, I think, you saw loads of street children around her in and around Gilgil, and just felt someone had to do something. This was in about 2008, and that's when the charity started. And so she bought a house, and 7 kids came to live in this house, and they started small, if you like, and then gradually they've built up enough resources to buy a plot of land and build a better place for them, if you like. As I say, it's a bit like a mini school. It's a bit like a kind of prep school. It's got its own garden. It's got its own playground. It's got a little football pitch, or area where they can play football. They grow quite a few tomatoes, and they've got some polytunnels. They grow quite a lot of their own food for the kids, try and keep them as healthy as possible. They've got an area where they make briquettes, which they try and sell, and so they're trying to do a sort of bit of self-sustainable activity. They've got a women's group who make clothes, belts, things like that to try and sell, and obviously to give some of the local women a bit of employment. So it's a really good thing. They make their own bread. They've got lots of people working with the kids. They've got their own bakers, as I say. They've got their cooks. They've got their nannies, and obviously administrators to help run the place, as well as people looking after the children. So it's quite a big work in progress. And recently they've been raising money to move the children from the local schools where they've been going to school. And if I'm honest, I don't think the local schools are particularly good. As we might complain about the schools over here, but I think I've got a friend who and she sent her daughter to the local school because her daughter was very good friends with one of the local Samburu and tribeswomen and his daughter, and they went, and the sort of story she came back with about beatings and things was quite remarkable. And I know in Kenya there have been occasions where the children have risen up against the teachers who have beaten them, and they've just risen up and said no more. And that's partly because in Kenya, one of the few jobs that carries a pension is a teaching job, and so because of that, a lot of people are drawn to be teachers purely because of the pension, not necessarily because they enjoy working with children. And as a result, you've got the wrong people sometimes working in these environments who haven't got the patience or don't really understand children. And there's all sorts of stories about people turning up and registering the children and going off to work in their garden, just not doing their job. So now I'm sure things are changing gradually, and these sort of stories hopefully are stories of the past, but what Restart are trying to do at the moment is basically move these children to private schools. Don't think of the private schools as you might do in terms of the UK, but they are still a step up from the local schools, and the idea is that these kids will get a better education. And I think education is so important. Obviously, I'm an educator, but I would say that. But I do think it's important. I've just read a really inspiring book, actually, The Girl with a Louding Voice.
Okay.
I don't know if you came across that, but it's about a Nigerian girl who just wants to be educated. She knows that she needs to be educated, and she's forced into a marriage when she's 14. Well, I won't spoil the story for you.
Yeah, no spoilers. But it does kind of highlight something. And I was awful at school. I was one of those frustratingly bright children who got suspended and everything, and basically breezed through school, getting B's, C's, and D's without ever making any effort to do anything other than get kicked out of class. So I was literally probably one of the most annoying people you could teach.
Well,
But
that makes two of it. I think I was really annoying as well.
yeah, but in hindsight, I know in hindsight, if they say, oh, if you knew then what you know now, would I have been any different? No, I think I'd have been worse. I think I would have actually been a lot worse, because I'd have realised that academia, in the sense that it was presented to me at school, wasn't my forte. It wasn't what it was. But bearing in mind, you're talking about school in the 70s, in the 80s. It's not the way it is today. But I do think it's frustrating that people don't realise, like you say, funnily enough, the thing you're saying there about with Kenya is, from a government perspective, it's a great incentive to get teachers on board if it's one of the
Yeah,
few jobs that gives you a pension. It's like,
yeah,
actually, that's brilliant. Well done them.
yeah.
But as you say, the problem with that is how do you sieve out the bad apples who are just there for
Absolutely.
the
Yeah,
financial incentive?
you're absolutely right. And I'm sure there are many good teachers in Kenya. I don't want to say
Of course, yeah.
every, you know, um, yeah, I think you're right. I think yeah, it's how you gradually work out that actually there's some corruption going on in the locality. And of course, I suspect that the further away you are from places like Nairobi, where maybe there are people kind of keeping an eye on things, if you go
Yeah.
out into the rural schools, you probably have less people coming to inspect and seeing what's going on. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not an expert
No, no,
I
for sure.
mean,
But it's also interesting, like you were saying, the book you were just reading, and this is common not just in Kenya, in many continents in Asia, the continent of Africa, and probably the continent of South America. If you are a girl, education is not classed as something that's important for you. What's important is being a wife to somebody.
yeah,
And
absolutely. And I think, if you read, there's definitely a culture in some countries, maybe in Africa. I don't know if I was going to say, especially in Africa, I don't know if that's fair, but certainly in some cultures, obviously still you have girls being married off too young, without a chance to have any education. And in the book that I've mentioned, The Girl with the Louding Voice, one of the issues is that her father can't afford, basically,
yeah,
to kind of pay the rent and stuff, and actually he's attracted by the dowry that he's going to get for marrying his daughter off. And you can see he doesn't necessarily want to do it, but actually she recognizes that actually she understands why he's doing it, even if she doesn't want it to happen. But she realizes that for her father to kind of exist with her brother, he needs money. Otherwise he's going to be kicked out of this house and all that sort of stuff. So it's always, it's clever because there's a complexity. It's not always straightforward. It's not necessarily that someone goes, oh, I want to get rid of my daughter. It's sometimes, sometimes maybe there isn't an option. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too nice to the father in this
no,
case,
I
because
think you hit a nerve right there. Is the problem is these things are complex. They're very multi-layered, and often they're based on, we like to assume it's always based on the worst case scenarios from an emotion of greed or something, but actually sometimes the complexity is that people are trying to survive and they're making decisions from a place of fear.
yeah, yeah, maybe, yeah, I definitely, but it is also cultural. I mean,
Yeah,
you know, marrying girls off at 14 without any education is just not good for your society, because if they're having children that young, well, they've lost their childhood, and they've lost their ability to be educators, and therefore, or educated, and therefore, they're going to struggle. It's not going to be easy for them. Let's just say that, and it's not going to be easy for the next generation, because they may, well, having said that, they may say, well, I'm not letting that happen to me, but I don't know whether they'll get that opportunity. It must be difficult.
because also, I mean, comparatively, like you said, you said while we were talking, is people need to be careful about making assumptions about the equivalent of the private school we're talking about over there, making comparisons to the private school over here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think they're quite the same. Again, I don't really know, because I haven't visited. Maybe my next time to Kenya, I'll go and visit one of these schools to see what they're up to. Actually, that would be a good thing to do, I think. Because I think, when I do go and visit, obviously I'm there to recruit pupils to our school, but it's every now and again, if I have a window of opportunity to go and do something a bit different as well, I like to do that.
So what is
I,
it specifically that Restart does then?
so Restart Africa. I mean, I quite like the name Restart because in a sense, what they're trying to do is restart a child's life. So they get a child who comes to them. It could be as a baby, it could be as a 10-year-old, it could be as a 12-year-old, it could be as a 6-year-old, whatever. And they are basically trying to give that child another chance. So it is a restart. I think it's a good name for the charity in a sense. So yeah, they are trying to. They're trying to give that child security, love, confidence, all the things that you would want if you were bringing up your own children. You're trying to give your child that security so they can go out into the world from a position of, I don't know, self-confidence perhaps, and also knowing that they're loved, knowing that they're wanted. And I think that I was saying to someone the other day actually, this lady actually I was having a drink with after my duty night. I think the last thing I said to her that evening, probably fueled by a few glasses of wine, and you come out with these sort of trite phrases, but I said, my advice to her as a young teacher is just to remember that the kids who get into trouble are generally the kids with trouble, and it's very easy to sort of dismiss the behavior of a child and well, they've got to know how to behave. But if a child is coming from an area where there's been some trauma in their life, whatever it might be, then that trauma will almost certainly come out at some point, and generally, or often does come out in behavior that others would say, well, why are they behaving like that? And so again, with Restart, a lot of these kids that we've got at Restart have come from very troubled backgrounds where they've seen horrendous things, honestly, it beggars belief. I mean, I think I mentioned a story last time
You
about
did.
but there's another one I could tell you about a grandfather who basically.
Yeah, if you could, because I think it's important when people say that these people come from, like deprived backgrounds or difficult backgrounds or suffered trauma. I don't think people can understand comparatively in this country what they're actually going through and what's actually happening and what they had to survive just to get to Restart, where it then literally has to start.
Yeah, I mean, Restart, as I say, certainly when it started, Mary Coulson, actually, David, you should get Mary Coulson to have a chat with you sometime because she is amazing and she would talk to you, and she's like a sort of glamorous.
I'm interested already now. Now you've said glamorous.
She's a sort of glamorous granny, but that's totally unfair. She's not really. I don't see Mary as a granny. She's more of just a glamorous superstar, really, who is wonderful and has such.
We'll stick with a glamorous lady.
Yeah, glamorous lady. Let's say that. Yeah, but she's a mature lady, but at the same time, she just oozes love, and the kids absolutely love her, and I think that what she does is amazing, but she has that sort of heart who can't say no to kids, and some of the stories she's told me in the past was one about a grandfather who, I was going to say to you, I'll tell you now, the grandfather who couldn't afford to look after the children he had. He had about, I think, 5 grandchildren. For one reason or another, he ended up looking after them. But instead of going to find someone and saying, look, I need help, I just don't think there was that system in place in this area of rural Kenya. And so basically, he poisoned them. He made them.
Shit, right?
So he made them a really nice meal, and they hadn't eaten for a bit. So now, and I can't remember the details, but I have a feeling that 2 of the children died, and that actually 3 of them were very ill, but were rescued and are now at Restart. Now I may have got that wrong, but I know the gist of that story is right.
And go on, please.
Well, what I'm saying is, now I know that things must have been horrendous for him to even be thinking of that sort of scenario, but I also, you kind of think, well, come on, there must have been another way he could have surely found another way, or sought help or whatever it must, or whatever,
But I think that's
and,
the thing, though, isn't it? Is the gentleman on one hand must have been family orientated to be looking after his 5 grandchildren, but
yeah,
then there's another part of him because of the strains of rural Kenya, the strains of the beliefs of his own culture. Perhaps he was suffering his own mental health.
yeah,
Is the way out of this is to poison them, and that from his, and I'm not defending him in any way, shape, or form. I'm
yeah,
trying to kind of highlight the situations that these people are in, is that they come to a place where the right course of action is to poison the children.
yeah. I mean, I think what it does, whatever one says, what it highlights is the vulnerability of kids
Mm.
in these sort of situations, and poverty, extreme poverty, always leads to vulnerable children. And I mean, you talk to Mary, and she'll tell you that I think every single girl who's at Restart, who's above us, who's above, sort of 2 years old, has been sexually abused. So that's almost as par for the course. And again, you're. I think it's difficult it's difficult to really imagine it, in the sense that I know these things happen all over the world, but where you get extreme poverty, you get
Extremes.
extremes, and you get parents or grandparents or whoever's looking after these kids, or maybe they're not even being looked after, but you get kids. The only way to survive, to get some money for the next meal, is maybe to sort of either prostitute your children out, um, or they do it themselves because they're homeless or whatever it might be. And it's horrific, and no child should be going through that. And in a sense, you might say, well, Restart's just a drop in the ocean. It's trying to, and it is, but it's a sanctuary for 113 children at the moment. And you kind of think, well, the world, we need to wise up, and the world needs to take note of this.
But also that drop in the ocean is providing a different outlook for 100 children who
yeah,
will then go on with a very different cultural outlook of how things can be different from a perspective that is personal to them, because they are there for very traumatic reasons. So that's how you change culture to a certain degree, is one generation at a time, based on the previous
absolutely.
generation's experience.
Yeah, and you
So
want those children. You want those children going out into the world. Absolutely, you're absolutely right, David. And turning around and saying that is not happening to me, and I'm making sure that this is not going to happen. And also, hopefully putting something back into the world, and into the society that they've
that's it.
seen.
And if 100 of those children in the next generation get into 100 prominent jobs within local areas, governments, business leaders, men and women, and they then set the next set of standards, the next tones for the culture to communicate moving forward. And that's why things like Restart are important.
Yeah, I mean, David, it reminds me. I mean, there's a little bit of an example I could give you here, over here. It's like not quite the same, but I guess it's not quite so extreme, but it's still important. Which is,
Yeah.
so I'm also, or have been on the board of a youth club in West Everton called Shrewsbury House, which is known as the Shusey locally. And the Shusey is a great, great institution. It's been going since 1902, and it was an all boys club, and it's now co-ed. But again, it's a place where, in an area of pretty significant deprivation in Liverpool, the area around this youth club is one of the sort of, in terms of unemployment, it's one of the highest areas of unemployment in Europe, let alone the UK. And and it's got the usual issues you'd associate with in a city: deprivation. So you've got drugs, you've got crime, people not feeling safe walking around at night, and you've often got kids who are third generation unemployed. So there's nobody in their family who they can look up to and say, "Well, that's a good job. I want to be one of those." Often they're single parent families, and the youth club. What it does is it tries to give these kids a little bit of TLC, a little bit of wraparound care, an opportunity to come in and sound off to youth workers who understand. And it's interesting that in the time I've been involved with that youth club, certainly two of the youth workers, the senior youth workers, were ex-members of the club. And I remember the current lead youth worker is a lovely guy called John Dunbell, and he was a little boy when I first started going to the club, and it's just lovely to see him graduate through the club and realize that actually being a youth worker in that area would be a great job.
Yeah.
And actually seeing what his youth worker had done for him and realizing that he can do that for other children, and actually being part of that community. He understands. The key thing is actually, I think, he understands where these kids are coming from. He understands the pressures on them. He understands the pressures on their mums. He understands the pressures on their brothers and sisters and all the rest of it. He understands. And I think if you've got that understanding, then you're in a really strong position to be able to help. And, and some of those kids, come through the Shusi and they let's hope they go on to better things, and it certainly gives them opportunities. And I think the other thing is a good link with Shrewsbury School, and united by two old Salopians, which is the name for Old Shrewsbury School boys. And these two had been up to Glasgow, and they'd seen the deprivation up in Glasgow, kids without shoes, for instance, and on the streets in Glasgow. And I've just been to the west coast of Scotland on my summer holidays, and let's just say it's not Greece in terms of the heat.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. So then these guys come back down. They don't live in Glasgow. They've just been up there, but they decide, okay, where's the nearest area of urban deprivation where we can actually try and make a difference? And they settled upon Liverpool. So they helped set up this boys' club in Liverpool. And the first thing they did was they went to Shrewsbury School and said, right, we want your old shoes, because we're going to put them on the feet of these kids in Liverpool who don't have shoes. And that's kind of how it started, and there's been a continuous link ever since. And I think there's always a lot of private schools have had links a bit like that, I think, but not many of the schools have such a strong link now. I think it's great that this link is still there, and actually we've even got a boy from the Shusi at Shrewsbury School on a scholarship, and I think we'd like to have more. We'd like to have more links like that, and to try and help, where we can with raising money in times of trouble, like we've got in terms of the COVID pandemic and economic problems. As soon as the government start making cuts in education, the youth services go first, because they're deemed not necessary. They're not a necessity. A school obviously is a necessity. A youth club is deemed not to be. So they'll cut the youth workers. And if the Shrewsbury School community can help pay for a youth worker or to keep that club going, then that is a brilliant thing in itself. And actually, currently, I'm training for my 22-mile walk next Thursday. The whole school are going on a walk, and we're going to try and raise some money for the Shusi. And and that's probably the best thing we can do in a way. You can't, sometimes, I don't know what you feel like, David, but sometimes I feel, you want to try and change the world. I want to be involved in everything, but actually sometimes just raising money is a really important step in that direction, because you can put that money into a youth worker who knows what they're doing. And
yeah, I mean, I remember a friend of mine, Haley, and it's got to be nearly 10 years to the day, we did the London to Paris bike ride for Wilton Riding for Disabled, because we both worked in a day centre at the time, where the service users of that day centre used to use the Wilton Riding for Disabled centre. So they, so we, like you said, we couldn't do anything in that, but what they needed is money, and we had time and resources to raise money. And people underestimate that sometimes the best thing you can do is let the people that know what they're doing get involved, and let them kind of deal with that, because they have the infrastructure, the experience, the understanding. And it's a catch-22, isn't it? Because on one hand, you don't want to bring down everything to a monetary value, but effectively, in many aspects of life, your services are a commodity that are exchanged one way or the other. And some people, the service that they exchange is much better when it's one-to-one in something they're doing well. And then there's people like yourself and I. What we're very good at doing is raising awareness, raising money, and that's a great exchange of that commodity. You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
be the white knight and save everybody.
No, you can't, because we've all got our own families
Yeah,
and our own issues to deal with, and it's finding time, isn't it, to do everything. But but actually, actually, I've always enjoyed the chance to raise money for charities in terms of organising events and things. And I don't know if I mentioned this before, but we did a night must be about 4 or 5 years ago now. We did a night called Saturday Night Detention with Nick. It was Saturday night Detention with Nick Hancock, and so Nick obviously used to be a star of the old show. Was it Have I Got News? No, was it?
they think it's all over.
It's all over. Sorry, yeah, and he's very funny, Nick. And Saturday night, he actually did actually go to Shrewsbury School, so he lives locally. So he said he very kindly basically said, "I'll come and donate my time." So we managed to get him for this evening, and we did. We had because it was Saturday night detention with Nick Hancock. We had a school dinner, so it was just sausage and mash and onion gravy, followed by treacle pudding.
Fantastic.
And there was a bar, but it was very funny because the catering team. It's a guy called Matt Warburton, head caterer at Shrewsbury. He's a fantastic guy, and him and his team had sort of done some amazing publicity stuff, and sort of all the menus were surrounded by sort of that's right. They've written lines all over the blackboards around the place, and it was very funny. But everyone really enjoyed it, and of course Nick was full of good stories, and we had a young man who was a comedian who came down from Manchester called Kieran Majaria, who's also an ex-Shrewsbury schoolboy who's a doctor and also a comedian. He's very talented, and my son Joe played his guitar. He likes it like that. So it was kind of a night of cabaret, if you like. And,
Yeah.
But it was a really enjoyable evening, and I think we made £7,000 on the night. And
Good effort.
It's nice when you enjoy yourself and raise money. And we're going to do another one soon. Actually, I've got a friend who's up for a discussion, I think, and I think he could be an entertaining man. So we're looking at, I think, 11th of December. So if anyone wants to come to Shrewsbury to see another Saturday night detention, but this time with a Christmas angel, we've actually got a real life Christmas angel coming to discuss life with us.
Well, I'll have to make sure I put the links in, and also the links for your fundraiser. Is it next? Did you say next week you're walking? Or?
Yeah, I'll send you the links to that. If anyone wants to donate to the Shusey and the Shrewsbury School effort to raise, we're actually aiming to raise 100,000, which is what we did 5 years ago. But I have a nasty feeling we might not get quite so close this time because of it's not quite perhaps an easier time to ask for money. But I'm hoping that each child, each person walking is meant to be trying to raise £100. And if we did manage to do that, there's 820 children at the school. There's 100 staff and all that sort of stuff. So we might get near there.
It's an achievable target when you break it down into its numbers.
Absolutely. So
and again, it's if we can just recap on that, because I do think people don't understand that there are areas in this country that are deprived, and there are children who are walking around without shoes. With they're not. Because we do assume in this country that if there's a problem, social services are involved. And what people don't understand is by the time social services have been involved, the problem has got out of hand. That's how come social services have had to intervene.
And social services have to make some pretty difficult decisions, and
incredibly difficult.
And I think it's very easy to have black and white rules and say, well, this is what must happen, but it's not always. It's not always that easy. I remember talking to a youth worker in Liverpool, and he was a very experienced youth worker, and he just said, "Okay," he said, "you're dealing. Let's say you've got a family of 5 kids, and one of them's being abused by a parent. Is it the best thing to remove that child from the family?" And of course they went, yeah, of course it is. He said, well, but is it? He said, because you're taking them into care, you're taking them away from their family, from the rest of the children who they might be very close to. You're taking them away from what they know. You know, how bad is the abuse? What is the nature of the abuse? You need to ask all sorts of questions, and you need to be very clear that removing that child from the family environment is in the best interest of that child. And you know, still most of us would probably say, well, yeah, remove the child from the family. But he was just, I think, playing devil's advocate and just saying, no.
Well, it is, because the wider picture is that sometimes when you have a struggling single parent or struggling parents, removing that child just exacerbates their sense of failure as a parent.
Yeah.
Whereas,
yeah,
which
yeah.
then has a knock-on effect to the other children, and it has a knock-on effect to that parent's mental health. And this is when we start talking about how complex these situations are. If there's a better way to support the parent or parents with the children, well, then you've kept a family together. The circumstances might not be perfect, but you have a parent that's still doing their best with the resources they have, and within that, you create an element of self-esteem. And self-esteem is self-confidence, it's self-worth. And when, regardless of your background, if you can have a sense of self-worth and self-esteem, it's a superpower.
Yeah. And I think it's difficult to have self-esteem if you're not able to help your child, for instance. So, I mean, I remember speaking up in Liverpool to a lady who was a headmistress of a local school in Breck Road, and she was saying that they started a homework club for parents because, you know, one of the problems they were getting at the school was to set some homework for the kids, and you know, little Johnny or whoever would go home and he'd say, "Hey, Dad, any chance of bit of help with my homework, mate?" And it maybe dad or mum wasn't very well educated themselves and couldn't do it. So rather than admit they couldn't help little Johnny with his homework, they were like, "Hey, mate, I never bothered with homework when I was your age. I wouldn't worry about it, mate." So the kids don't do their homework because parents actually are too embarrassed that they can't help their children with homework. So what they did was the school started a homework club for parents to show them what to do, what their kids were doing, and how to help their kids. And you know, but unfortunately, the take up for that was 20%. But at least those 20% were actually interested enough in trying to improve the education for their children.
It's funny you should say that. That's happened to me today. I'm technically on annual leave at the moment, and so my sister is a single parent. She has 2 children. One of them is autistic, and so while I've been on annual leave, I've said to my sister, I'll take my niece to school every day and pick her up. You know, just help my sister out, quality time with my niece, you know. And, you know, family time really. And if you don't have to do school runs normally, they're quite entertaining. When you're doing them voluntarily, because you don't have to go to work and it actually gives you a reason to get up in the morning. They're good fun.
Do
you know what I mean? And my niece likes it because I give her Tic Tacs every day. It's like, there you go, there's your favourite Tic Tacs. Because I'm not a parent, I'm an uncle. I'm allowed to do all sorts of things. But my sister was saying, I asked my niece this morning, how'd you get on with your homework last night? And I said to my sister, how did you get on with the maths homework? And my sister said, no, I've sent a message to her teacher because she didn't know how to do it, and I don't know how to help her. You know, and that's the point. I mean, I'm an adult. I run a care team. I run a podcast. I run a part-time coaching and mentoring business. I couldn't add up for love or money. Like, literally, no pun intended. I can barely count my own money, and I'm not by any stretch of the imagination. You and I have had a very articulate conversation, so neither one of us are idiots. But I can't, you know, me and maths. No. We get along like Tories and Labour. Do you know what I mean? It just doesn't happen.
Do you think you're? I mean, I was just thinking. I can't remember who it was on the radio the other day. Was someone talking about maths, and I think it was on a Radio 4 program and it could have been Start of the Week or something. They had a mathematician on, and he was just saying I know it was a friend of mine who's a mathematician. He just said, but he said, people say maths is like Marmite, you either hate it, so you don't get many people who kind of go, yeah, maths, you can take it or leave it. But he said, I wonder actually how much maths or hatred of maths goes back to a poor teacher, or not enjoying it in the classroom when you're little because you missed out on the basics. And I genuinely believe, I like to believe anyway, I would be quite good at maths if I hadn't been pushed up a couple of classes too early, and then actually I didn't do the basics. And actually, when having been good at maths, I suddenly found myself really struggling because I had missed out chunks, and I never really recovered because I didn't like it, because I couldn't do it. And I wonder whether.
I have a theory on that from a personal perspective. So I had a natural inclination towards history, but the reason for that is because I found people interesting, sorry, and so I had a natural inclination towards subjects that I found interesting that typically evolved around people's behavior, how societies came about. Because I think one of the great things about history that isn't presented, if you understand history, you can almost predict your future, because history, the politics and how things evolved came about because of human behaviors, and human behaviors haven't changed. It's just the clothes we wear and the language we use that changes. So you can have a good indication of where society is going, or a good understanding of it, if you understand your history and all of the cultural elements of history. And was it last week or the week before, my brother and I, because it was like nearly the last week while the kids were on holiday, my niece was round with her friend whose grandma lives next door to us. So it's like they came around. So we got the old Coke and Mentos out, and it's like, right, we're going to show you some chemistry. And basically we drilled a couple of holes into the lids, chucked the Mentos in, screwed the lids down, and then everybody had a Coke fight. Do you know what I mean? One bottle at a time, right? And what we did was made that very interesting. And at some point, they will learn about, carbon dioxide, and do you know what I mean? I can't remember how it works, what the chemistry is behind it. But I made that moment of chemistry interesting for them and exciting and fun. And
absolutely.
And I think that's the problem with maths. Certainly, when you and I were at school, it was taught from a blackboard. They never taught you the fundamentals of maths in a way that can be interesting. Like look, when I was a kid, if you'd have taught me the maths behind the velocity of a cannonball and a catapult and an air pistol, I'd have been all in. I'd want to know about trajectory, the equations, pi, and all of the things that went behind how you propel something forward. Because I was a kid, because that's what it was like when I was a kid. But they didn't. They taught me my times table from a blackboard, and I couldn't associate that to anything I was interested in.
Well, I think, because I think my first maths teacher was a little old lady who was just sweet and nice. And then I went to school where the maths teacher was sort of elderly man. He looked like 105 as far as I was concerned, but I was quite little then. He was probably about 35, but but he was no, he was quite elderly, and but he was very old school. And if you got something wrong, you got a knuckle duster. Just a punch on the top of the head. And I remember being so scared of getting things wrong. You never ask questions because you were basically busy quietly copying off the person next to you to make sure you didn't get it wrong, so you didn't get knuckle duster. So I never bothered trying to work out how to do it. It was just like, that's right, I'm going to do that. And I think the fear that I had of that guy was such. And then he eventually retired, and I thought, phew, we maybe have a nice maths teacher. We didn't. We got a young guy who was absolutely I don't know whether he was the grandson of the old maths teacher, but he appeared just as ruthless and tough.
But it's true, isn't it? Because that reminds me of a story when I was a young boy. So I'm half Irish and come from, my mum is a Southern Irish Catholic. So I went to Catholic schools. I went to a Catholic church, and I was an altar boy. And when I was about young, 7, 8, we had a priest called Father Beatty, and because my dad was in the army, we went to the army church, and Father Beatty was a colonel. Father Beatty, to me, was possibly the nicest person I'd ever met. And he didn't
live up to his name then.
but for beating, no, it's not at all. But he, to me, in my mind, if Jesus Christ wanted a priest, it was Father Beatty. He was so into his community. He so loved his job. He was so passionate about people that for a period of that childhood, I contemplated that I would want to be a priest because I just loved this guy. I thought he was amazing. The following priest, whose name I can't remember, was all children are sinners. You're the scum. You are Satan. And I remember, I can still remember the boy's name. His name was Anthony. And he made a mistake. He was a little bit nervous. It was a new priest. He made a mistake. And when we got back into the vestry or whatever it was, that area, he had him up by the scruff of his neck and was shaking him in front of all of us. And we'd gone from Father Beatty, the world's nicest guy, who used to give us Christmas presents and tell us what wonderful children we are. And when we made a mistake, it doesn't matter. Life's about mistakes. We'll get it right next time. And if we don't get it right next time, we'll get it right the time after. And he was so adorable and so encouraging for young children, and a great role model if you were an altar boy, because he would actually come round to your house, ask you about school, ask your parents how things were and stuff like that. With this other priest, scared the hell out of all, like no pun intended, but literally scared the hell out of all of us, and terrified of us all, and none of us wanted to go to church, and none of us wanted to be altar boys.
Yeah,
and that's the difference with children's influences. And like I was saying, I think one of the reasons I found things like the humanities subjects and history really interesting is because you were encouraged to talk about your findings. Whereas like you were saying with maths, you were petrified and wouldn't dare ask the teacher if you were making a mistake.
And I think the best bit of advice I got as a young teacher was from a teacher who I very much enjoyed his company. He just said, you'll hear a lot about, going hard and you can lighten up at some point and all that sort of stuff. He said, but actually, he said, my best bit of advice to you, he said, is love the children, because they know if you're behind them, if you are someone who is behind them and loves them and wants them to do well and supports them, and that's the best way to be, because ultimately, if they know they have your support, then they will cooperate. And you can't run a boarding house in a boarding school without the cooperation of the inmates. It's much harder anyway. I suppose you can if you go in and you're so vicious and unpleasant and all the rest of it that everyone's in fear and trembling. That is one way of running it, but and maybe that's the easiest way, I don't know. But I think the easiest, personally, I could never do it that way. You have to go in and you have to be approachable, you have to listen, occasionally you have to apologize. And so I've done a few times, and for making mistakes, and be human. And once they see that you're human and actually you can be negotiated with, I think you're always going to have a better atmosphere around the place. And that's absolutely true. So I think any teacher who rules with fear is going down the wrong line, and they won't ever. Well, I suppose some people say, well, we get results here, but I don't know at what cost.
Yeah, exactly that, and that's at what cost, and that is probably a great place to stop, because I'm mindful of the fact that your time is limited.
Yeah, but again, look after some children.
Yes. So, as always, thank you very, very much. It really is appreciated.
Well, David, can I just say thank you very, very much indeed for being so kind as to have me back on your podcast. And I'd just like to say, if anyone does want to sponsor the Shoesy, I can send you the links, and also Restart Africa and Restart. To send a child to private school in Kenya at the moment is, I think, around £360 a year. But obviously, that's quite a lot of money. But if anyone wants to sponsor a child in that sense, that'd be great. But if not, £1 a week, £1 a month, whatever you can afford, every little penny helps in these cases. So I'd love to get you to have a chat with Mary. So maybe we can help that to happen as well.
If you could do the introductions, I'd really appreciate it. And I'm just gonna tie you in quickly, because I do want you back on the podcast, because we're going to talk about your comedy character, who is
Barely Grilled.
Barely Grilled.
We have Barely Grilled. He's an outside adventurer, explorer, and
I think we all know where the pun is here.
Well, I think we do, but he's not as good as that one.
No.
And he's a pretty average character, really. We're also working. There's a couple of other characters as well. We're working more,
So, ladies and gentlemen, there is going to be a third podcast.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much, David.
Thanks, Giles. So there's Giles, and as you heard at the end, he and I will be sitting down to do another podcast. And yeah, there was lots to digest in that episode. Like I said, I hope you enjoyed it. Please check out the links in the description if you think you can help or are interested in helping. Or let me know if there's any more information that I can provide for you. Thank you very much for listening. Take care.